How do you set up Authentik on AWS? How do you configure your initial admin user? How do you do all of this securely so that you can use Authentik as an SSO, anywhere from your home lab all the way through to your organization? My name is Craig Simon. This is what we're going to talk about today on this episode of Simon Says Technology. This video is meant to go along with a blog on my website that has all this information in text format. And I'll just put the URL right here on the screen. So if you'd like the text version of this, you can go right over there to read that as well. Now, before we start installing Authentik at AWS, we might want to address a couple of questions first. First off, what is Authentik? And then second, why might I want to use it? Now, Authentik is an IDP, or identity provider, and it competes versus a number of both commercial and open source solutions that offer this functionality. So the commercial solutions might be things like Okta, PingID, Auth0, and others. They'll generally charge you a certain amount of money per user per month, and then they'll maintain user databases, groups, permissions mappings, and then they'll provide the actual SSL functionality itself via the protocols that we use. SAML and OIDC, really the two most common. The open source solutions, they're in a variety of states currently, but from the open source perspective, I really believe that Authentik is really leading the charge in what's available here. So let's dig into it. We'll start to install Authentik, and then we'll go ahead and we'll show you exactly how this can be used. Okay, here we are at the AWS console. Now, I'm going to be deploying to Oregon or to US West 2. That's where I place most of the infrastructure I deploy. It's one of the newer regions and it gets services and things first, so I like to go ahead and go there. It's also one of the least expensive regions to work in. The things that we're going to need to do, first is we're going to set up a VPC, and we'll walk you through setting up the VPC. Once the VPC is in place, we will deploy an EC2 instance. We'll configure, set up that EC2 instance fully. We will get an IP address assigned to it, and then we're going to add it into DNS so that we can utilize a fully qualified domain name, or FQDN, to access that box, because that's really the best way to do it, as opposed to utilizing IP addresses. I'm not really the biggest fan of utilizing IP for infrastructure type services like this. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to click on VPC. That will bring me into my VPC dashboard. And now here's where I can actually go ahead and start to create my VPC. So first I'm going to click on the Create VPC button. To work through this dialog, for anybody that's not familiar with this, let's just step through it. The first choice is VPC only or VPC and more. We want to actually do VPC and more because VPC and more will create more than just the VPC, which is just the container for our Authentik instance. It's also going to create some subnets, some route tables, and some network connections, both to the internet and to S3. And this is what we want. So I'm going to select VPC and more, and I'm just going to go over here to where it says the project name. And I'm going to give the VPC name the project name of Authentik. And what this will do is this will create a VPC called Authentik-VPC. The next question is the CIDR block range. And this is always going to be a private IP address range. So this is the range of the VPC and the subnets that we're creating. In this case, this really only makes a difference to me if I am utilizing the private or RFC 1918 address space in order to talk to this box, communicate between servers working inside of EC2 on the private side. I'm not doing this. This Authentik installation is for public deployment and public use. So I'm not going to actually probably ever use the private subnets and the RFC 1918 address range. So the 10.0.0.0/16 is just fine from my perspective. We'll simply continue this and keep going. Now, I'm not going to bother with an IPv6 block because I'm not going to use IPv6. The tenancy that I'm going to pick will be default because a dedicated tenancy will actually cost more. So I don't need a dedicated tenancy, so we're simply going to use a default tenancy. The last few fields that I need to go and fill out here are the number of availability zones. And what I can do if I'd like to is I can customize the 2 or 3 or even 1 availability zone that I'm going to use. As I said, I'm going to deploy to US West 2, so I really don't care. 2 AZs is just fine. It's the default value, and it will work just fine for me. And I can use US West 2A and US West 2B. Does not matter at all. Now, at this point, we have to go and make sure that we're selecting public subnets. Remember, we're using public subnets for all the deploying that we're doing. So I want public subnets. So I'm going to use 2 public subnets, and I'll deploy 2 private subnets. Probably never use them, but they come with the box, out of the box with the VPC, so that's just fine. Now, the NAT gateway, I don't want to deploy a NAT gateway because this is going to cost money on an hourly basis, and it's only really going to be applicable if I have things, again, in a private subnet, which we're not going to do. So no NAT gateway there. I will, however, take the VPC S3 endpoint. The reason for this is that Authentik gives us the ability to utilize S3 as a storage space for a lot of assets that Authentik might want to use while it's running. If we don't deploy the gateway, then our connections will have to go out of the VPC to the internet, hit the S3 service, and then literally hairpin right back into the environment. That's inefficient, slow, and costly because I'm going to pay for that internet access. If I use the S3 gateway, I can actually come in on the private side of AWS's connection and then talk direct to the S3 service via the gateway, never having to go out to the internet. And that's exactly what I want, so I'm going to create this. The last couple of options that we have on this VPC creation right over here are I want to enable DNS host names and DNS resolution. This is just standard, so I'm going to go and do it as well. I'm just going to click on the Create VPC. Now the entire VPC, everything that we've asked for will be created by AWS, and then it's going to tell us, hey, this is all successful, here's all the objects that we've created, and then we can click on the VPC button right over here in order to see it. So here's what we've got. We've got information at the top about the VPC itself, and then the resource map. We've got our Authentik-VPC, we have our subnets, our route tables, and the network connections that were created. So here is everything that we need in order now to go to EC2 and then to deploy our actual Authentik instance. Okay, I'm at the EC2 console, and this is where we can actually deploy our instance that we want to go and use to host our Authentik server. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm just going to click on Launch Instance button right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go use the fully qualified domain name of authentik.myexample.me. Now, I own the myexample.me domain, so this is just something I'm using for test and demonstration. I'm going to go and I'm going to deploy create an A record that will then point this fully qualified domain to the instance that we're going to be deploying with a public IP. So that way we'll be able to get to it just using this host name. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm just going to scroll down to the application and OS management section. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the operating system I want to use for this box. This is going to be Ubuntu. I'm going to use Ubuntu Linux for this deployment. And it's just selected the Ubuntu Server 24.04, which is the most recent long-term support version or LTS version. That's correct. Now, the one thing that we do want to change is we want to change the architecture. Because as I said in the written version of this article, there is, we can save a few dollars a month by deploying with a Graviton ARM instance in AWS, as opposed to an x86-based instance. So I'm just going to pull down the architecture selector right over here. I'm going to say 64-bit ARM, and it says, hey, I got to make some setting changes in order to apply this. Is that okay? The answer is absolutely. Go ahead and do it. We'll confirm. And now let's just confirm it. It's Ubuntu Server 24.04 LTS, and it's 64-bit ARM. This is perfect. We're just going to then move to the next part of the form here. Now, the next thing that we need to specify is the instance type. And since we moved to an ARM instance, we're not going to go with like a T2 or T3 or T3A, which is normal. On the ARM architecture, those are T4Gs. And the one that I'm going to use in this case is what's called a T4G.small. The T4G.small, if you see right over here, has got 2 virtual CPUs and 2 gigabytes of RAM, which is exactly what Authentik wants to deploy this. So we're just going to select that and just take a look at the pricing. It looks like it's just about 1.5, a little bit more than 1.5 cents per hour. So that's about what we're going to pay. Okay, fine. Let's continue and move on. The next section I have to set up is the key pair. Which key pair am I going to use to authenticate into this box so I can actually install Authentik? Well, I'm going to use my for demo purposes only key pair. So I'll set that here. And then I need to set up my network settings. Now, what I need to do in this case is I'm going to click the edit button. That will allow me to edit these settings at the top. The first one is the VPC, and this is the one that we just created. It just picked the default VPC by default. I don't want to use that, and I'm going to specify the Authentik-VPC in this case. I need to specify a subnet, and I can use, and again, any of the publics. I'm just going to select subnet public 1, USS 2A, and I'll select that. And then for the auto-assign public IP, I'm going to keep this disabled. The reason is because if we set it here, this can, in certain circumstances, change, and I don't want that to ever happen. So that we're going to set up an elastic IP that will never change. I'll show you that next. Now, from the security group, I'm going to go and I'm going to create a security group. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste both the fully qualified domain name in the security group name and the description. And just that, it allows me to always know this is the security group for this box. Then I can just keep that straight in my head. Now, what we need to do for anybody who's not familiar with what is a security group in AWS is nothing more than a firewall rule. By default, everything without a security group rule is disallowed. So those connections will not be allowed through the AWS firewall and into this instance. By default, we have SSH available. And that makes sense from a Linux perspective. We'll probably want to shell into this thing, SSH into this box, and then start deploying software. So I absolutely do want SSH available, but I don't want it to be available from anywhere. This is anywhere on the entire internet. And I don't want to make my SSH service available to anybody that would like to try and compromise it. Instead, I'm going to simply set it to my IP, so it's only available from this location. I am, however, going to add 2 more security group rules, so just click the Add Security Group rule twice. The first one is going to be for the HTTP protocol. The second one is going to be for HTTPS. Now, this is a pretty standard thing to do. I want to make HTTP and HTTPS available from the entire internet. So I do need to set that source type, and the source type will not be from custom. It will be from anywhere, and it will be from anywhere on this one as well. So this way, anybody on the internet, any service that needs to talk to my Authentik box, any of those connections will be allowed, just not going to allow SSH to everybody else. So this is exactly the way that we want to set this, and we can continue going on. We don't have any additional advanced network configuration that needs to be done. The only thing that we need to do in addition is we need to provide a bit of disk. And for this installation, I can go with something as small as about 32 gigabytes. Not a problem at all. So we've gone through all of our settings. We've confirmed that everything is correct, and this is all looking really good. So now I can just go ahead and click on the Launch Instance box. What's going to happen is AWS is going to validate all of our settings. It's going to deploy our box, and then it's going to say, hey, success, this machine has just been set up and it's starting to come up. We can click on this link right here that will open up to the EC2 and then show us our instance, and we can actually see that this is actually starting to initialize. So the box is starting to come up. We can't talk to it yet because we still don't have an external IP address. So for that step, all I want to do is scroll down here, go to Elastic IP, and I'm going to allocate an Elastic IP address. I'm going to allocate it to the exact same region and a region that we deployed this into. And I am going to add a tag. In this case, I'm going to specify a tag, and the tag is name with a capital N. That's how we go and we do tags in AWS. And then I'm going to just paste in my hostname again. So that way I know that this Elastic IP has been allocated for this host. And again, I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to right click. I'll associate the Elastic IP address, come down to Instance, choose my Authentik box, which will then give it my instance ID, and then click on the Associate button. So that's all I need to do in order to create an instance, create a security group, allocate an IP address, associate those together, and then make this box available for me now to go ahead and SSH into. But we're not done. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to set up DNS. So we're going to do that inside of the Route 53 service, and we'll do that next. Okay, we're in the Route 53 console. This is where you then can create a host record for this box we've just set up. So to do this, I'm just going to click on the Create Record button right here. I'm going to come to the host name and type authentic.myexample.me. Now we can create a number of different types of records. The one that we want in this case is definitely going to be an A record, because this will allow me to associate a host name to an address, which is exactly what I want to do. I want to also then come down here to this values. I'm just going to paste in the IP address for this host. So when I query it, this is what's going to be returned. I'm also going to up my TTL, because this will allow this to cache the value in other DNS servers for a lot longer, and lowers the number of requests that are going to be made against a DNS server, lowers my costs as well. And then from the routing policy perspective, none of these additional routing policies make any sense. What we need with a single IP and a single host name is going to be the simple routing policy, so I'm going to select that. Then I'm going to click on the Create Record button. That will then create this record for me. Now, the record that's been set has to be pushed to all of the servers that AWS uses for Route 53. I can click on the View Status button right over here, and then what I'll see is that as the changes are being made, we have a status of pending right over here. What we can do is we can refresh, and then within 10, 20, maybe 30 seconds or so, that status of pending will change the status of in sync in green. And then that will show us that all of the changes that we've made they have been pushed, and you can see right over here, it now says in sync. So now all the DNS servers are synced up, and then I can now use authentic.myexample.me in order to talk to the server. And that's what I'll show you here next. Okay, so the box is up, and I'm sitting in iTerm. What I've done is I've just SSH added my demo key so that I can use it to help me authenticate through SSH to the system. The other command I've got sitting here is my SSH statement. In this case, I'm just specifying that I'm using the user Ubuntu, which is the actual username that you need to use when SSHing into an instance of Ubuntu Linux at AWS. This is the default user. So I'm just specifying on my SSH statement what I want to use, the user I want to use, and where I want to go to. And yes, I want to actually complete my authentication, so absolutely go ahead. Now, the first steps that we have to do is we need to go and we need to start upgrading the operating system. So I'm going to go do an apt update, and then after this is going, the apt update will download all the current repositories from Ubuntu so that we can get all the current package information into apt itself. Once it's done with this, it'll tell us, like in this case, there's 21 packages that can be upgraded. So I'm just going to do the upgrade, say yes, and this will apply all the latest software to this instance so that we make sure that we're starting off with a basis of everything being upgraded as much as it can. Now, while this upgrade is going on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch really quickly back to my web browser, and the page that I'm sitting on is the Docker Engine install for Ubuntu instructions. So I'm just going to scroll down to the installation methods, and I'm going to use the install using the apt repository method. This is a standard method that most of the time you should be using. I'm just going to come over to the first box. I'm going to click on this to copy it. And then I'm going to go back into my shell, and I'm going to paste this in. This is just going to add the Ubuntu software repository into my server so that I can go and I can actually do the Ubuntu install. So back to the web browser, I'm going to then go to step 2, which is just install the Docker packages. I'm going to the latest version. I don't need to do a specific version for any reason. I'm just going to copy my install command. I'm going to head back to my shell. I'm going to paste in my install. I'm going to say yes, go ahead. Now this is actually going to install all of the packages that we need. While that's going on, back to the web browser, and then we're going to go and we're going to verify the Docker installation by running the hello world image. I'm just going to copy this one back over to my terminal, and we're going to wait for the rest of these packages to finish installing. Now, what is the idea with this test? So the hello world container is a very small container, just displays some text to screen. We want to test this to make sure that Docker is running as we expect it to. And the only real difference here is that when we're using this test container, we're using the sudo command. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because we haven't yet to this point in the installation added our user to the Docker group. That will give us access to the Docker socket so that we can run Docker commands as a regular user and not as root. We don't have that yet. We will in just a little bit. I'm just going to paste in this this Docker run command right over here. And all it does is just displays this text to screen. That's exactly what we want. That says, hey, everything is working fine so far on the Docker installation. We're good to go. So the only thing that we need to do then is we just scroll all the way back down through all these instructions, and we're going to go to the post install steps for Linux. That's down here on the bottom. So the post installation steps for Linux, if we click on that link, we want to be able to manage Docker as a non-root user. Now, as I said, the Docker group is already created, so we don't need to do this step. We need to do this step. So I'm just going to copy this one. And then back to the console, I'm going to paste this in. That adds my Docker account to the group. And then I'm just going to go ahead and run back to the web browser, and I'm going to go ahead and scroll back down to the configure Docker to start on boot with systemd. I'm just going to click these commands and then paste them in. And this is going to go and set up Docker so that it auto starts whenever the host does. Now, that's exactly what we want, so that if this thing ever reboots, Docker will start, Authentik will restart, and everything will simply go. So that's all we need to do in order to have this machine ready to deploy Authentik. Last step here, we need to reboot this. So I'm just going to say do reboot, and we'll let this box go ahead and come back down, come back up, take about a minute or so for it to reboot. When it does, we'll join and I'll have this started again, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the installation. Take about a minute or so for this box to reboot, and when it does, I'll come back in, and then we're going to restart the installation. Okay, so it's been a minute or two. Our box should be finished rebooting and should be up and ready to accept another connection. So I'm just going to up arrow back to my SSH command. I'm going to reissue it, and I'll authenticate back to the box. We're back here in the shell. Now, before we go and we start installing Authentik, what I want to do is I want to head back over to the web browser really quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow the docs. So if you come over here to the docs link and then go to the installation link and then go to the Docker Compose installation. This is the installation that we're going to actually go through. So I'm just going to scroll all the way here to the first step, which is actually grabbing a Docker Compose.yaml file. So if I go over here, I can actually click on the copy button, and then we can go back to our shell. Now, what I want to do is I actually first want to create a directory for all this stuff to be stored in. So I'm just going to make dir an Authentik directory, and I'm going to cd into it. Now, just so that you can see where I am in the file system, let me just do a pwd and an ls. So I'm in my user directory, inside of an Authentik directory, in my user directory, and I'm sitting here inside of an empty directory I just created. It's got nothing inside of it. So I'm going to issue the wget command. That'll go ahead and that'll grab the Docker Compose file for me. And then I can go ahead and I can list out what I've got, and you can see that now I have a Docker Compose sitting inside of this directory. That's just perfect. Back to the set of instructions. And then what you're going to see that is we have to start actually creating a .env file inside of the directory that we're in. The first thing that we're going to go is we're going to create a password for PostgreSQL. PostgreSQL is part of this Docker file, so we have a database on the back end to store all the information we're going to store into Authentik. The other thing that we need to create is we're going to create a secret key. And that secret key is going to allow Authentik to go ahead and use that to go ahead and create tickets and to create certificates and everything that it needs based on the secret key value. So I'm just going to copy those 2 steps. I'm going to head back to my shell, and I'm just going to go paste this in. And now you see that we have our Docker Compose file and we have our .env file. Exactly what we need. Back to the web browser. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable error reporting because I think that's just a great idea to have regardless. So copy, back to our terminal, paste this in, and this has just added this line of Authentik error reporting enabled to true into our .env. That's all we've done. Now, I'm not going to walk you through the email configuration in this process. I'm going to set up the email a little bit differently, and we're going to do that a little bit later. But all you need to do in order to set up emails, you basically just come over here and you copy this entire section of code, add it to your .env, so bring up an editor, edit your .env file, add these lines, and then modify those lines to properly represent whatever you need in order to authenticate to your email server. And that one's a little bit off the beaten path, so we're not going to go through that as I said. We will, however, use some email for Authentik. The last step is to actually change the ports that Authentik uses by default. By default, when running under Docker, Authentik is using port 9000 for HTTP and 9443 for HTTPS. I don't want to use those. I want to use the well-known port numbers of 80 and 443. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over and I'm going to click on this link again, head back over to my terminal, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to nano my .env file. I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to paste these commands in. That's all I need to do. Now, one thing that I generally do notice, and I'm not sure why this happens, is just based on this Authentik secret key right over here. You see it's on 2 lines, and I'm not sure why. I normally just go ahead and grab that second line, delete the carriage return the line feed, bring it together on 1 line. Now this all looks perfect, so I'm just going to exit and I'm going to save. So now my Authentik server .env and the Docker Compose file have been set up, and they're all ready to go with all the information we need in order to go start up our Authentik instance. So what that means is that we can just go back to the web browser, and if you take a look on the last steps for startup, we have a Docker Compose pull and then a Docker Compose up-d. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go grab the Docker Compose pull really quick, and I'm just going to execute that on its own. So what we're doing is we're grabbing from Docker Hub all the containers. We've got 4. We have the Authentik server, we have an Authentik worker, we have a PostgreSQL server, and we have a Redis server. All those containers are being downloaded from Docker Hub, and they're going to be installed on my local machine so I can instantiate these guys and then start up these containers. Once this is done, let's just flip back over to our web browser really quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the Docker Compose up-d command right here. I'm going to copy this, and I'm just going to flip back to my shell. My Docker Compose pull has completed. So now if I go in and I do my Docker Compose up-d, this will then instantiate my containers, start them, and now we're up and running. What I want to do here is I want to do a Docker PS so that I can go and I can find out what process ID my server is actually coming up under. And I'm going to issue a Docker logs command. I'm going to go do a Docker logs for E4. That will go and that will get me into the server process. And then I'll be able to go ahead and actually see Docker coming up to Docker getting ready, or sorry, Authentik getting ready and coming up. Now, what we're going to see here in just a few seconds is that Authentik is going to start to, once all the different components are up and functional and ready, it's going to start to apply some database migrations. It's going to start to apply some blueprints. You see, Authentik is written in Python. It's utilized in the Django Web Framework as well. And this whole concept of Django is this database, maintenance, migration, everything that needs to go ahead and happen is all handled by the Django framework and by Python itself. So Python and Django are going to apply the database migrations. They're going to go do all of that, and then we will go and we will get ready with the next installation step. I will just go ahead and speed this process up so we can go ahead and we can get through it quickly. Okay, it looks like the Authentik server has finished coming up. Let's go and let's attach to it. So I'm just going to go back to the web browser, open up a new browser tab. And I'm just going to go to authentic.myexample.me. Now, this is the Authentik main page. So this is how we would gain access to the Authentik server. What we have to do is we need to create an administrative user. The first user that we create is always going to be our administrative user. But if you look, there's no way, there's no button to click in to create a user. There is no default credentials with Authentik. None of that actually happens. The way that we go in to create our user is we have to come in over here to the URL bar. And I'm just going to start wiping out everything from this if-flow, if/flow/. And right over here at the flow, then what we do is we go and we type in initial-setup and then a slash. Whoops. And then hit return. Now, this is the actual dialog box that we go and we will set up our initial user. So I'll give it my email, and password, and then press login. Now I'm logged onto my Authentik user. I've gone ahead and I've created my initial user, created my initial administrative user. And I'm in my applications available. There are no applications available because we haven't created anything yet. But if I want to administer my Authentik instance, just go to the admin interface. Now I've got my desktop. So here is everything that I've got, and then I can start to step through all of the tools here on the left-hand menu bar to start creating all of my flows, my stages, set up my users, set up my applications. And this is what we're going to get into for the next series of videos on how to set up Authentik. The first one that we're going to do next is how do I set up an Authentik, or how do I go ahead and set up a flow to enroll users so that I can go and I can send out emails to my user community and say, hey, I want you to create a user on my Authentik server. Here's the enrollment flow, follow this. So that'll be our next step that we're going to go through, the next video and the next article that we're going to go through, and then we'll step through the process of utilizing Authentik, adding different applications, and seeing how we can really go ahead and build a full IDP implementation utilizing this open source software. I hope you had a fantastic time today. Looking forward to the next video on this session. Please, if you have any questions, go to the website, craigsimon.guru. Go to the article. We have a interface where you can go and you can post questions, get answers. We can help everybody build up their Authentik IDP. Have a great day, and we'll see you on the next video. How do you set up Authentik on AWS? How do you... How do you install Authentik on AWS? How do you set it up, configure your admin... Before we get too deep into this, the first question is, what is Authentik? Authentik is an SSO... So before we really start... So before we start installing Authentik, let's answer a couple of questions. What is Authentik and why